Hey YouTube, this is Ian from Big Rock Adventure, and today I'm going to give you 5 ways to take your motorcycle photography to the next level. So one of the greatest things about adventure motorcycling or motorcycling in general is you go to amazing places, amazing scenery, amazing vistas, traveling all over the world. You really want to be able to capture the essence of where you traveled. These are lifelong keepsakes that you can have with you forever, and plus they look really cool on the internet, right? So photography has been a passion of mine since I was a kid. My grandfather taught me how to use a darkroom. He taught me how to use a camera. Back then, of course, we were using film cameras. Then when I got into motorcycle riding, it was like a natural connection, natural synergy between riding and photography. So since I was a kid, I started taking photographs of my motorcycle travels, and I've learned the hard way how to do it wrong and how to do it right. And so today we're going to tell you how to do it right and to make your photos look professional level, even if you don't have professional equipment. So before I jump into the tips, I do want to talk about equipment. So this video is not going to tell you about some fancy equipment you need to buy to take good photos, because to be really honest with you, the equipment you have doesn't really matter very much. I don't care whether you're using a smartphone or a digital SLR or a point-and-shoot camera. These techniques that I'm going to tell you apply no matter what the equipment is. You can get incredible photographs even if you just have basic equipment, or even just using the smartphone that you're already carrying with you. The reason that advanced equipment is not really going to help you in this is because until you become a really good photographer and understand all the technical aspects of photography, it's not really going to matter. Those additional features that those high-end cameras give you, you're not going to know what they are or how to really use them effectively. So really you're better off just using the smartphone you have or using whatever digital camera you have. Okay, so tip number 1 is all about composition. So what do I mean about composition? What I mean is, how are you framing the photograph? What is in your photograph? So there's something in photography called the rule of thirds. And basically it says that you should divide your photo up into kind of 3 different sections. A lot of times they'll say it's the foreground, the middle ground or the subject, and the background. And that's a general rule to follow, but you don't always have to follow it, but it's something to keep in mind. So when we talk about composition, your photo needs a subject. Now you can have 1 or 2 subjects, but if you get beyond 2 subjects, the photo kind of loses its meaning. So you need to decide what the subject of your photo is going to be. What story are you telling with this photograph? So you want to frame your image. So instead of just jumping off your bike and taking the first thing that comes to your vision, you want to move around and get the motorcycle framed properly and get the background framed properly. You want to pay attention to this. So some things to keep in mind when you're framing. Again, pick a subject, whether it's 1 or 2 things. Get distracting items out of the frame. So if it's like half of your buddy or half your buddy's bike or some random crap on the side of the road, you need to reframe your photograph, i.e. move around, and get that out of the frame. Another huge tip that I have, and you're going to see this throughout my entire video today, is use the zoom feature on your phone or your camera or whatever to zoom in on the photo and change the background and better frame your subject. Oftentimes you're going to be using the zoom to bring the landscape closer to the viewer. We're going to have examples on this, don't worry. Okay, some other things about composition and framing your picture. Get creative with the angles. So don't always just take it from eye level or your head height when you're standing up. Get down on the ground, or get underneath your motorcycle, or take it from under the skid plate, or shoot through the wheels, or come up with some creative angle to make your photo different and stand out from the rest, right? So another thing about composition is you need to, as you're riding along, and this is hard when you're in a group, but you can still do it, and sometimes I ride at the back just so I can do this, but you need to be surveying the landscape and what's going on around you for the perfect framing. So what I do when I ride is I'm going along and I see a perfect vista or the perfect opportunity for a photo where the landscape and the light and everything lines up, and I stop and I position my bike there to take a good photograph. Because if you want to get good photos, it's not going to cut it just to stop wherever the group stops stops or stop at your rest stop at the gas station or whatever it is, or a road junction, and get your photos there. You're going to have to be willing to stop in opportune places. So let's get into examples for composition. So in this first example, we have a photo here of my old 690. I think this was shot in southern Utah, somewhere near Duck Creek, I think. And it was in fall, so the aspens were blooming, so that was really awesome. So we talk about subjects, right? So this photo has two subjects. It's got the motorcycle and it's got the trees in the background, right? We took all the clutter out of the photo. You don't see other bikes, you don't see other people, you don't see cars, you don't see random crap in the frame. So I use the zoom lens of the camera to frame it just with the bike and a little piece of the road so you can see you're on the road, and the trees in the back. Now, if you notice, I actually parked my bike on the opposite side of the road. So in America, we drive on the right. So I parked this over on the left shoulder because that was the best way for me to get my photo. Now, don't worry, this was a very lightly traveled road. Another thing to notice about the framing, I didn't just jump off my bike and stand right behind it, right? So I'm looking at the background and I'm looking at the angle of the bike to make sure that I maximize those opportunities. So I actually stood in the middle of the road to get this photo at the right angle. So you can see I took the photo at an angle to the bike, around a 45-degree angle to the back, so that you can see the side profile of the motorcycle. And of course the sun also is hitting it, and we're going to talk about lighting later. Okay, so here's my second example in composition and framing. So this was a photo I took a pretty long time ago with my Tiger 1050 somewhere on the coast of California in the Central Coast, really beautiful coast road. But the way I made this photo look good is a few things. So again, I got off the motorcycle and positioned myself in the best way. I used the zoom lens of the camera to zoom in. I got further away from the bike and I zoomed in, and what that did was it allowed me to pull the landscape in the background, the fog and the mountain you see, closer into the viewer. And it also put the motorcycle at a nice angle. You can see the motorcycle's pointing forward, so it's kind of telling a story of that we're going in that direction, right, towards this scene. So the subjects of this photo, one is the motorcycle, right, and you can see my helmet hanging off the thing, so you know I'm on a ride. It's kind of part of the story. You can see I've got saddlebags, so I must be on a trip. And then the second subject is the mountains and the fog and the ocean in the background. So bike and scenery, two subjects, right? We don't have a car, we don't have a road sign, we don't have a random bird or whatever it is in the photo. So keep it simple. Taking this photograph from behind the bike, and I do this with a lot of motorcycle photography, it gives you a sense of direction, that you're traveling in a direction with the motorcycle. And I think that really helps these photos out. So in this photo and in the first example I showed you, besides the background blur, which I was able to achieve through shooting at a fast aperture with my lens, you could take these same photos with a camera phone or a point-and-shoot camera. You honestly could. As long as you have a little bit of a zoom feature, which a lot of the newer smartphones do, they actually have separate lenses, you could get the zoom part. And to blur the background, some of the modern phones do have, I think, some apps or software to do that. Number 2 tip. You need to tell a story with your photo. So if you've seen photographs of just a random jumble of stuff, right? A bunch of bikes, a bunch of people, different things going on, you're not telling a cohesive, simple story with your photo. What I mean about telling a story, and this goes along with the composition and the framing, is that what is it about the photo that you're trying to convey to the audience? So you have to think of someone else looking at this photograph and what emotion are they getting from it? What story are they getting from it? What is the feeling they have? What place are you in? What time of the day is it? What feeling do you want them to get? So you have to think about that when you're taking a photograph. Photography is trying to tell a story, even if you're just taking a picture of landscapes. So my first example here is a photo of my friend Jonathan, and it tells a story of a few things, and you can tell from looking at it. So the first thing is that you can see the snow in the background, so the viewer thinks that, oh, okay, we're in the mountains right now. You can see the snow. You can see the expression on his face, right? So he looks like he's really happy, he's having a great time. You can see that he's wearing off-road gear, so he's got the showy off-road helmet and the goggles, and you can see his chest protector. So we must be off-road doing something fun, right? A few other things to notice about it. So we're telling a story, but we've also zoomed in really close onto the helmet and the face. So we don't have a lot of distractions in the photograph. So if I had taken this photo from a wide angle, you would have seen part of a motorcycle, you would have seen other things in the frame, but it wouldn't have been as good of a photo. Okay, I love this photo, and I want to tell you guys, I took this photo with a phone. I didn't even pull out my good camera to take this photo. Sometimes what happens when you're riding, especially in adventure riding, is you come out of like a pass and you get to a valley and there's a scene like this, and maybe you guys have stopped to look at it and admire. Well, if you're feeling emotion from a scene, you need to pull your camera out and try to capture that. I think I actually may have taken this from the seat of my bike, but I'm not sure. I may have jumped off to the left. So there's a few things that I like about this photo and how we're telling a story here. So you can see we've got a rider on his KLR. He's looking out into the distance. He's looking at that lake bed out on the horizon, right? And so that's telling a story and conveying an emotion. You can see I put the road here. The road is winding through the photograph. That's a common thing that photographers will use. It always makes for a great photo to have a winding road going into the distance. It gives you a sense of space and distance and even speed. A few other things about this photo. So notice that he's sitting on the bike, and I think I actually told him, I'm like, Sal, stay on the motorcycle and don't look at me. Because the fact that he's sitting on the bike looking forward as he would naturally, it makes it look like a natural photo, and it's more genuine. If he was turning around to look at me and giving me a smile, it would look kind of fake and posed, right? So a lot of times your best photographs are going to be like this, where you catch your buddy before he knows you're taking a photograph. A lot of times the best photos are when they don't know you're photographing them. By the way, this photo was taken in the Panamint Valley of Death Valley. I think this is right when you pop out from Goler Wash heading west. So my third example here for telling a story is a few things. So you've got the mountains in the background, that's great. You've got all of us dressed in our off-road gear. I had Deb hold her helmet like that so you can tell that we're doing a dirt bike ride, so that tells a great story. So the fact that we're standing close to each other must mean that we're friends, right? So again, you're trying to tell a story. I cropped this photo, and we're going to talk about processing later, but I cropped it to focus on the four of us with the mountains in the back and the grass in the front. Okay, tip number 3, you have to get close to the subject of your photograph. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make when they're photography on these motorcycle trips is not getting in close to what they're trying to photograph. Now keep in mind my tip about having a subject and telling a story, right, and framing it properly. So figure out what your subject is, and you can have two things. You could have a bike and a landscape, or whatever your two things are, but try to get close to both of them. So good photos all have a close, clear subject without distractions. So if the subject is your motorcycle, either get close to the bike if you want that wide angle effect and keep your lens at the wide setting, or use the zoom to bring the motorcycle in closer to the frame. If you're shooting a combination of a motorcycle and a landscape, I'd love to use the technique of standing further back and using the zoom of the camera or the phone to draw the bike in closer, but also to draw that distant landscape or that road in closer to the viewer. Doing photos at wide angle is a bit more of a challenge because you get too crowded of a scene. And so this is a photo I took somewhere in Central California. I think this might be Highway 25 in the Central California Valley. This was to get on my Tiger 1050. I love that bike, by the way. I don't have it anymore. So in this photo, there's a few things to talk about. So I use the zoom, again, you're seeing me use the zoom to bring in that distant background. A few other things about it. I park my bike right on the edge of the road with a kickstand kind of right on that white line. You can see that little bit of grass behind the rear tire. You've got the bike perfectly in that right third of the frame. You've got the shadow of the bike hitting the road. The bike's almost silhouetted a little bit because of the lighting. But the important elements of this photograph are the motorcycle, which I used to zoom in and got close to, and the road winding off into the distance. That tree there and that fence is kind of a nice bonus. But again, when I saw this, when I was approaching this little corner and kink in the road, I saw this road winding off with the foothills in the distance, and it looked like a great photograph opportunity. So I pulled off, braked really quick, pulled off, jumped off the bike and got this photo. Again, it wasn't somewhere I had planned to stop. So you've got to be willing to make unplanned stops. So here's my second example on getting close. So this is a shot of my friend Charles, and we took this a long time ago. I think this was taken in Death Valley. I can't remember where. I think we ran into his group of riders, and we were talking and chatting, and I pulled out my camera, grabbed my lens, and zoomed in and took a shot of him and his friend. So a few things to notice about it. Again, I use the zoom, or if you don't have a zoom, you can get off and get close to the person. but there's not a lot of distractions in the photo. There is another rider behind him, which is telling a story of, okay, this is a group of guys going off-road. You can see the off-road helmets, you can see the scratches in the helmet. That has a story there, right? You can see the camelback, so they must be on a long ride. And you can I blurred the background, but you can kind of tell that we're in some sort of desert environment. It would have been a better photo without that stop sign behind them, but again, you can't always be perfect. Notice how in getting close, you're able to see the rider's facial expression. Even with the helmet, you can tell that he's smiling, he's happy, he's in his happy place, he's on his adventure bike, right? Okay, so here's an example to again, drive this point home if you need to get close. So this was somewhere in Montana when I did my Great Divide ride on my KLR a long time ago. And a lot of times what happens when I'm out on my ride and trying to get photos is I'll take multiple angles and multiple shots to get it right. So my first attempt here, which I'm showing up on the screen, you can see the motorcycle's not that close, and then you've got kind of this empty void space here to the right. I mean, yeah, there's a road, but it's not that interesting. You've got a lot of sky, which you don't really need. You've got this also, see this distraction? What is this white thing below the sign here? That's not really good. You don't want to see that. This photo is really meant to tell a story of a place, so you need to be able to read the road sign and the packed motorcycle indicating a long trip. So then on my second attempt, which I'm pulling up here now, you can see that I change my angle, I step back, I use my zoom to zoom in on the bike and the sign, and yeah, I've still got those power lines in the background, but overall this is a much better photo. You see how it's better than this one, than the last one I took? So you're always having to adjust, and you're not going to get it right the first time. Okay, tip number 4 to make your photos amazing. You need to pay attention to lighting. Now, I'm not saying that you need to drag around a bunch of studio lights like some sort of movie set to photograph your motorcycle when you're on your trip. What I'm saying is pay attention to how your subjects are being lit. So whether it's a landscape or a motorcycle, position the subjects in a way that the light is hitting them at a flattering angle. So before you snap the shutter, you need to think about, where's my light coming from? What color is the light? Is it harsh? Is it soft? Is it warm? Is it cold? You can't always fix those things, although you can tweak settings, but you really need to pay attention to how you position things. So an example of this is you can move your motorcycle around to maximize the sun hitting the part of the motorcycle that you want to illuminate in the photograph. So sensors on a camera, they have a dynamic range limitation. Dynamic range is the difference in between the highlights like this and the lowlights like my computer and my face, and they only have so much range that they can capture between those two. They're not like the human eye, right? So you can adjust for that in processing, and we're going to get to that, but you have to be thinking about your lighting and is this photograph going to even be usable? So a lot of photographers have a phrase called the golden hour. And there's really a golden hour kind of early in the day and late in the day. And what it means is that the sun is low in the sky, giving you a soft, warm light. And that's typically when your most beautiful photographs are, whether it's a photo of a person, a motorcycle, or a landscape. However, the rule is flexible because it's not just an hour, it can be many hours depending on the lighting and the time of year. So in winter, the sun's lower in the sky and you don't have as harsh as shadows. The most challenging lighting situation is the middle of the summer and the middle of the day. And it happens to be when a lot of you are doing your motorcycle trips, right? It's July, you have time off, and you're riding out in the daytime. But that's the most challenging lighting situation because you're going to get really harsh shadows and really bright highlights, which is going to give the camera a really hard time to figure out what to expose to. Do you expose to the highlight or do you expose to the shadow? So when I was a kid, one of my family friends told me as I was learning photography, like, always have the sun at your back, never shoot into the sun. Well, over the years, I've kind of learned to throw that rule out, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that cameras are getting better with their dynamic range. They're also getting better with their software. So I've taken photos with my phone into the sun, and a modern phone can pull it off and somehow manage. It brings down the sun and brings up the shadows automatically to make it work. It's kind of amazing, and you couldn't do it in the old days. Sometimes the sun can be a very attractive and interesting element in your photo, so don't always shoot with your back to the sun, although in general, you want to follow that rule. So the best lighting, in my opinion, comes at that golden hour I talked about, which is near sunrise and near sunset. But also it comes on days with dramatic skies. So skies, I almost wanted to talk about sky as a whole nother tip, but I wanted to keep this to 5. But partly cloudy days where the sun is filtering through clouds, makes for the most dramatic and most beautiful photographs. It just does. If you have just a clear blue sky and a bright sunny day, there's not much you can do with that, right? It's just kind of there. It's just kind of a big blank area. So my first example here with the lighting is a shot I took of my Africa Twin. Gosh, that's such a good looking motorcycle. That's the best looking adventure bike I've ever had. I love that color scheme. But anyway, so this photo was taken, I think, somewhere in the Colorado-Utah border. I think it was in Colorado, sometime in the fall, and the lighting was just beautiful. So a few things to notice about the lighting of this photo. I pulled my bike off the road to the right, and it happened to set up perfectly where the sun was kind of coming from a 45-degree angle towards the back of the bike. So it was illuminating this side of the bike that I was photographing from. So think about it. If I had gone to the other side of the road and shot the motorcycle from the left side, I would have had a silhouette of the bike, and the colors and all the engine and everything wouldn't have been illuminated, and it wouldn't have looked good. By having the sun hit the wheels and hit the side of the bike, you get the cool effect of those gold rims. You can see the bodywork, the windshield, the luggage, everything is lit really, really well. It also throws the shadow to the other side and kind of out of the photo. Also, that grass in the foreground is lit up by the sun, which looks really great. Do a circle around your bike and look at the scene and figure out which is going to be the best angle for you to maximize your lighting. Now, disclaimer, the shot was taken in high dynamic range, so it looks a little bit weird, it looks a little bit photoshopped. High dynamic range just means that I pumped up the shadows and messed with the shadow highlight ratio to make it look more interesting. So my second example here is an example of throwing out that notion that you have to have the sun to your back. You can shoot into the sun, and I did it with this shot. Now, the interesting thing is I took this photo with my cell phone, which is kind of amazing that the cell phone can pull this off. So my friend Brandon and I were on a ride out in the California desert. Great day, and it was towards the end of the day, so the sun was low in the sky. This is also kind of during the winter, so the sun's at a nice low angle. You've got the clouds in the background. But by putting the sun in the photograph, it just makes it interesting. Here's another example of lighting and another example of me shooting into the sun. I was on my GS on my way home from Arizona heading back towards California, so driving into the sun at the very end of the day. Actually, I ended up riding well into the night on this ride. But there's a few things I like about this photo. You're definitely telling a story because you're taking it from the saddle of a motorcycle. Now, that's an advantage of having cruise control, but that's another video to talk about that. But you can see I am moving along there on the highway. The sun is setting, so I'm trying to get home. You're telling a great story. The lighting is really good because you've got the sun in the background there, which was great. I was able to do that. You've got bugs on the windshield. You're telling a story there. The composition is also good. The rule of thirds is coming into play. You've got the dashboard of the bike, the outline of the motorcycle. You've got the road going off into the distance, and then you've got the sky and the sun as your third component. So that's your rule of thirds. Okay, so tip number 5, final tip for you guys to take amazing photos. This has to do with adjusting your photographs. So don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to go out and get Photoshop or Lightroom or one of those programs with a billion buttons that you don't know what the hell they do. I'm intimidated by those software too, and I only use them when I have to. You can get apps on your smartphone to do basic things that I'm going to tell you about right now. So the way you're going to adjust your photos is a couple main things, right? We're going to focus on 2 big things. It's going to be cropping your photos to kind of fix the framing and to tighten in on your subject. And it's going to be adjusting the lighting of your photo to correct for shadows and highlights or things like that. So I'm going to use this photo here as an example of post-processing or adjustments. So this photo, going back to our other tips, we've got good composition, we're telling a story, I got close to the subject, and we've got decent lighting. So now we're going to bring in the 5th element, which is processing. So the way that I processed this photo was 2 main things. I cropped the photo, and what I mean by cropping is I cropped out a bunch of the sky and a bunch of the foreground, so I had too much dirt and too much sky, and I had these bikes in this big horizontal line, but I don't want all that sky and dirt because then they get lost in this big photograph. So I cropped it into this panoramic format to focus in on the subject. Again, that's going back to get close to your subject and tell a story and figure out what your subject is. The other thing I did was I adjusted the lighting. So it was kind of one of those middle of the day shots, and the shadows were too dark and the sky was a little bit too bright. So I used the shadow highlight feature to bring down the highlights a little bit and bring up the shadows a little bit to correct for that. So this video I'm taking right now is kind of a perfect example of the shadow highlight thing. I've got too many highlights here coming in from this window, so it's hard for me to capture the detail coming from out here and the detail in here. I've got one studio light over here, but it's not really enough. But lighting is always something you're going to be dealing with, so don't be afraid to use processing to fix it. And in fact, this video you're looking at right now in Premiere Pro, there's a way to adjust shadows and highlights that I'm using now to kind of correct some of that, even in this video right now. Post-processing, whether it's cropping or adjusting colors or adjusting the lighting, the shadows, highlights, this is why the professional photographers have better photos than you for the most part. Yeah, they have good equipment and they know how to take a good photo and compose it right. But also they're doing a lot of post-processing to make it look that kind of magazine ready or that, you know, really high-end look to it. So don't be afraid to do post-processing. It's going to be a necessary step if you want to take your photos to the next level. So great photos are a combination of all the things I've told you, but also knowing how to process it right. So in trying to wrap this up and come to some conclusions, taking photographs on your motorcycle trips is one of the greatest skills you can learn. And the better your photographs are, the better memories you're going to have for the rest of your life. And if you want to have a website or you want to have a blog or you want to just share your photos with families and friends, they're going to look so much better if you follow these 5 tips. A few last things to keep in mind. You're not going to be perfect at this from the get-go. Rome was never built in a day, and it's going to take you time to get good. That's okay. Practice, learn from your mistakes. But by following these 5 tips I've given you, you're going to really shorten that learning curve. You're not going to have this learning curve that goes forever. You're going to really shorten it and be able to get this done much faster. And also I wanted to mention that I'm making a big investment in my channel with gear. I've bought new cameras, I bought new lenses, I bought lights, I bought more tripods, I bought a GoPro, and so I'm going to be setting up and taking this channel to the next level. So I hope you guys will stay with me throughout this journey. And thank you for being with me, and we'll see you next time. Ride safe. Hello, what? Who is this? The stock market crashed. I told you, buy low and sell high. I gotta make my GS payment over here. I gotta buy coffee, I gotta buy more fog lights for my bike. People would just subscribe to my channel and like my videos. Maybe I'd actually make some money off this thing. Well, you know what? You're fired.